Welcome to Faith at Work, the podcast where we inspire and equip professionals to live out their Christian faith in the workforce. Whether you're navigating leadership, balancing work-life challenges, or looking to make a deeper impact, we're here to equip and guide you on how to bring your faith into work. Now here's your host, the director of the Unity Foundation in Alexandria, Minnesota, Kelsey Tim.
Welcome back to the Faith at Work podcast. I'm your host, Kelsey Tim. Today's episode features a panel discussion recorded live at the Global Leadership Summit here in Alexandria. The conversation was facilitated by Peter Nelson and included three local leaders: Tucker Reishus from 3M, Saundra Lauer with Well & Company, and Tony Jensen from Douglas Machine. Our recording begins as Tony is answering the question, what does living out your faith at work look like for you personally? From there, you'll hear each panelist share their own perspective on faith, leadership, and the impact of living boldly for Christ in the workplace. Let's listen in.
Tony, it's being true to, who God's created you to be, right? Who God's created me to be. And I think a lot of, what Craig Rochelle was saying yesterday, consistency, right? Pretty hard to witness to somebody if you're manipulating them at work one day and then fighting in the church the next. People aren't going to take that very well, right? So being consistent and being a person of character, and living that way day in and day out, whether you're at work or at home or wherever you are.
Thank you. It's certainly a theme of there doesn't need to be a separation. And if you're told that, that's not true. And I can tell you from a legal standpoint, it's not true. And that's not only if you're leading an organization, you're fearful, and or if you're an employee, you can bring your faith to work. And I think that's such a great takeaway. And then I like the consistency piece where sometimes do I have to be two different people? I want to be this, but then maybe I shouldn't be here. And I think what I'm hearing from our panelists is you can be authentic to who you are and consistent in all aspects of your life. And that includes your job. You don't have to pick and choose or put on a different face or a different hat, depending on where you are. Maybe the next question I would ask is, what's the biggest challenge that you've had bringing faith into the workplace or living out your faith, your values in the workplace?
I'll start with that. I would say certainly the challenge of walking that line of boldness and professionalism. And I would say for me, making that transition from not intentionality within faith to intentionality of faith at work. Because in reality, you certainly want to be, offer clarity around Christ. But taking into consideration that I have employees, I have patients, I have business partnerships that come from all different backgrounds. So really having charity around each of those interactions has taken practice for me.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that. I think similar, right? It's finding that balance or trying to walk that line, whether that's, when I was a production supervisor, I'm trying to figure out how do you discipline somebody in love, let somebody know I still care about you, but I still have to uphold the company standard. Sometimes sometimes I did that well, and sometimes I did that very poorly. So I think trying to balance those things, and then as well as, like you said, being bold about stuff, right? But I think some of that still comes back to being authentic and being genuine with people, right? If you're trying to put on a show, it's just not going to work.
So I think for me, one of the greatest challenges is part of the reason why the HR maybe plays a role in people's anxiety around bringing faith to work. It is legal. Absolutely. You can bring your faith to work. There are some areas, though, where in leadership roles, where we do have to be careful about discrimination and having people feel like they have to be a certain thing. They have to believe a certain way in order to get a job, to be promoted. And so I have to walk that line of living your faith, making sure that we don't cross over and put the company at risk when we're making decisions. And it's not just from a legal perspective, sometimes from a culture perspective too. There's lots of great people, right? We want to have great employees, and faith is a great part of that, but isn't necessarily, required to be a great employee. So that's the challenge for me, is just finding that balance of bringing my faith, encouraging others to bring their faith, and then just making sure as a company we don't put ourselves at risk in areas where we have to be cautious.
Yeah, and we could maybe go down that road a little bit. I think walking the line is something that is challenging for everyone. Excuse me. I think about, just like we want to be able to live out our faith in the workplace, we have to let other people live out whatever that is for them, not faith or a faith of something different. And to me, that's a big piece of it. I don't know if you want to expand on that, from your HR background of just kind of respecting everyone where they're at. And that's where the legalities come in. Is there anything you can add on that from someone that maybe doesn't believe? And how do you handle that?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's about respect. It's about care for people. Jesus met people where they were. And so that's the approach that I try to take, is to meet people where they are, not to try to tell them to be where I am. And my hope is that the way that I conduct myself, the way that I interact with people, the way that I care for people, invites them to be curious about what makes me different. Why am I that way? Why do I treat people that way? And that opens the door for a conversation, about faith. It has many times in my career that I'm not pushing it on them, that I'm inviting them in to have that conversation with me.
You're creating the curiosity to say, what is it about him? I want to learn more because he seems to have a different piece about himself. I love it. Tucker, you talked about that line of upholding company policy, but modeling Jesus' behavior and/or caring about the person themselves, and something that maybe I think about in that time frame, or in that context, is separating the person from the behavior, right? We can always love the people, but sometimes the behaviors are such that they don't align with the company values or policies, right? And so I don't know if you have anything else to add on that, but when you said it, it just absolutely hit me in the head going, okay, when we can always love the person. The company will always let you love the person, your teammate, your boss, maybe someone you manage. So, but sometimes we have to have a little correction on, well, you're a great person, but your behavior wasn't something that we can continue to have happen here. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, most conversations that I had to have with employees who have broken policy or weren't upholding whatever standard, generally people do, right? They were receptive to that. Other times people played the victim and felt like you were out to get them, right? And in those situations, you're right. You're addressing the behavior and that situation. For myself, I think the struggle was always, I hate conflict, right? So I'm a people pleaser by nature, and I hate conflict. And so those things were challenging for me. Maybe it was less challenging for them, right? It was tough for me. But at the end of the day, most of those conversations I was blessed to be able to have, where I think people understood that I genuinely cared about the person, right? I could we could have those conversations, and I could explain, I want you to succeed. You're going down a path where if you continue to do this, you're going to get terminated, right? I want you to succeed. So let's work on a plan to correct that behavior, to get you in a position where you can succeed. And that's loving, right? That's not mean. That's not harsh. That's not picking on somebody. That's addressing the core behavior, and hopefully doing it from a place of love. And I think that was where I had some of the greatest success in ministering to people in that role. Was you're dealing with people's lives, right? People are coming to you with, well, why are you not showing up to work? Well, I'm going through a divorce, or I don't know how many people I walked through that had to go to treatment, right? So you're dealing with messy lives, and if you can extend some level of grace to people, where they feel seen and they feel heard, and that opens an incredible number of doors to be able to pray for people to come back to years later and say, hey, I'm struggling with something. I didn't even know I had a connection with this person, but just simply through having some level of relationship, it opened a door where I've had people come back and say, hey, I'm going through this.
Love it. Showing them that you care. You can show Jesus love in a lot of ways, even in tough conversations, right? And that's, as you mentioned, Tony, where Jesus met people where they were at, right? And that's what we get to do in the workplaces as well. How about a moment where faith positively influenced a decision or outcome? Any examples of that any of you have?
I've got a couple, I guess, from a business perspective, I'm grateful again to be part of an organization that exhibits and lives faith and has, mission and values that are built around that. And, I can think of coming into 2025, it was a different year than what we'd experienced in prior years. And so as an organization, I know that there were individuals in our leadership team who were praying about 2025 and see that turn around and things look very optimistic for us as we finish out this year. Probably one that I would maybe call or bring up is on the relationship side. So I had the opportunity in my role, again, like when you're in supervisor positions, business owner positions, you get to experience life with people. I had an employee owner at Douglas that called me one evening. He had just gotten a diagnosis of cancer. Tackled him on the phone that night. He told me, he said, "I'm just in a really dark place." And I, through the conversation, he expressed his faith to me, and I asked him if I could pray for him. I've done that for other people, and I didn't really give a lot of thought to it, other than that it's important to me to do that. He told me later on that how much that meant to him. It meant the world to him, and we developed a relationship through that process. Fast forward a couple of months from that conversation, my wife was diagnosed with cancer. And we were struggling with what that meant, what that was like, and I was in a little bit of a dark place. And to have somebody then that turned around and reached back out to me. So I brought my faith into the workplace with him. He turned around, brought that back to me. We developed just a great relationship through it. And Ron Moore, I don't think is here. I was going to call him out, and I'll do it anyway, even though he's not here. So Ron one day was in my office, and he asked if he could pray for me. And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Right now." Oh, that's a different world for me. I'm more very comfortable praying in private than less in public. So he did. He prayed for me right there. And that inspired me in my conversation with the other employee that I was working with to pray with him, not just for him. And that whole experience for me, that's over the last 6 months that we've gone through that. And it's just been super meaningful and impactful from a business perspective. So don't underestimate the impact that you have with those around you when you are living your faith and bringing it to work.
And a situation that comes to mind is actually one of our first intentional acts of faith within the company was, of course, a few years ago. And situation within our first responder community, they were in crisis and needed access to quick care and essentially incredibly affordable free care. And as a company, it did not make immediate sense. Financially, I certainly didn't have the time to take on this patient population. But it really was through prayer that I was reminded that the company is really about blessings and not just a business. And so stepping into that and responding, we did. And I mean, you're providing an environment, prepping your employees for an environment for a population that has immense distrust in healthcare, distrust in the faith world, and really being able to foster that kind of environment. And fast forward 2 years later, it's been some of the most challenging, but I would say rewarding outcomes to watch these individuals regain trust within in healthcare and start their faith journeys. And really, it just comes down to the power of prayer. And within business, it's not always about profitability. And so if you looked at the return on investment in that, it's not monetary, but certainly was a calling that we were called to do.
Just a quick follow-up. So, you're leading that organization. Any observations on how that impacted your teammates when they, you talked about the patients, but talk a little bit about your teammates and how that opportunity impacted them.
It's a great question because, you approach this from a novice state. You have no idea, really. There's no algorithm to it. And so as you're presenting to the team, hey guys, we're going to do this. And there's, of course, why would we do that? We don't have time. The finances don't make sense, right? Everyone's telling you otherwise. We go back to that rewritten purpose and core values on what the business is for and what our mission is for our community. And the way the team rallies around that and to watch them serve within the clinic, within community events, serving this population, it was beautiful. They're hungry to do it. They're like, what are we doing next? from that, someone had the idea to create the Well Giving program to have people apply to free care. And so it really just sparks an interest in more good works within the community.
What a gift you gave them, because obviously it's great when someone can feel how they impact the bottom line and the success of the company. But when you give them that little feeling of what it means to give of yourself and help another human being that really doesn't even make financial sense, what a gift you're able to give them, and that's where purpose comes in. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
Tucker, do you have any thoughts on this?
I mean, how it's affected specific business outcomes, that I do struggle with a little bit more. But I think, I look at it as you don't know what seeds you're planting, right? Like you said, I've had employees come back and reach out years later asking for prayer for things. And so I look at those things, that there's impacts to people's lives when they know that they can come to you and ask questions. Or, you don't know the little piece, how does it Paul say, Paul planted, Apollos watered, but God gives the growth, right? There's all of those components that each and every one of us plays a part. We don't necessarily get to see the entire picture in how it impacts people's lives, businesses, and everything else.
Absolutely. I've been on both sides of the first situation where early on Gordy Stock prayed for me when my father was having some challenges, and I can't tell you how impactful it is to be on that side of it. And I've also had the opportunity to be on the other side of it, and it feels good, and you get some of that back. So I just, don't miss the opportunities to do it right then and there, and when those opportunities arise, because it's very, very powerful. Do you guys have any intentional practices, whether it's prayer or other aspects of integrating faith in the workplace, that you're intentional about on a cadence, on a monthly basis, or on meetings or anything like that? Is there anything that you're doing on a regular basis to integrate faith in the workplace?
I guess for me, I've had like many things, ups and downs, right? I'm gonna walk around the building and pray every day, a couple days around the building. But I think honestly, it still starts at home. Every morning to sit down and spend the time in Scripture and prayer, to continue to ground myself that way. And as they say, more things are caught than taught, right? I have 4 children, and I don't know that I've ever told any of them to read their Bible, but I've been struck that in the mornings, that's the first thing the 3 oldest ones do, is they sit down and read their Bible. And why? It's because they've seen my wife and I do that on a daily basis, right? And am I fully engaged every day? No. But they're soaking up the word of the Lord. And I think the same goes for day in and day out at work, right? So how do I conduct myself? Do I join in all of the complaining? Do I join in the criticism of everything around me? Or do I try to carry myself in a different way? Do I use foul language like the majority of the people around me, or not? People notice those things and they catch that something is different. So it's maybe not a specific habit of, I pray this prayer or I do this little thing each day, but that daily intentional time in the Word, and continuing to come back to, community with God the Father. That's what I think we
love it. Then you're in a very large organization, so that can look differently when you're in a larger organization, as far as having intentional structure where we do this, and this. That becomes more challenging. But I just love, Tucker, you've been able to live out your faith the way it works for you and your organization. How about the other two? You guys have any things to add on how you intentionally?
I would just piggyback off of what you had said. Is it starts with you. I mean, truly, I think we can have the best of intentionality within cadence in the workplace to make sure our business decisions are aligning with our purpose and evaluated in that way. But personally, in times I've found where the work feels heavier, decisions seem harder, woe is me is what I call it, is when I'm not practicing what I'm trying to influence. And so that certainly goes down to prayer life. Accountability partners can help you stay true to that. They can notice when you're falling out of practice. So certainly echoing, it starts at home. Days get very busy.
Yeah.
So starting at home.
You mentioned the word accountability. Sorry, I'll let you go in a second. But Are you intentional about having someone accountable for you on some of those things?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So I think many leaders in here, the weight of leadership it brings me to my knees sometimes. Right. And so outside of leadership within the company, which is growing and wonderful, but I think it is important to be intentional who you find as mentorship outside of your place of employment, a non-biased accountability partner per se. And I would say I found that certainly in Unity Foundation. Even just yesterday, I was in the hallway speaking with Brad, and he asked about how's work going. He said, we're in transition. I feel like it can show up about 50% outside of work. First question without skipping a beat, he said, how are you showing up for your family? And that's a wonderful accountability to have. I lean into my pastor. I have a wonderful pastor, Trinity, and quarterly he checks in, and without a doubt, quarterly I say, I'm fine. And I meet, and 2 hours later, I'm convicted, incredibly encouraged and sharpened, ready to get back and be able to give and lead how I'm called to.
Accountability is so key. Thank you for sharing. Go ahead.
Yeah, as far as habits go, I floss.
Nice.
No, I actually have one of the things that I do is I have on my calendar every day a meeting and a notice, and it's just for me. And it's to remind me to pray. And the idea is for me to come into my day to pray over the business, to pray over my role, that I do things the right way. And it sounds great, and I'd love to tell you that I'm great at it, and I make sure that I take that time, but it's super easy to be like, I got enough stuff going on, and I push that to the side. The good thing is that users of Outlook know that stays in this meeting reminder until you dismiss it. And so oftentimes it's, maybe mid-afternoon, and I come back and I'm clearing out stuff out of my reminders, and oh shoot, I didn't pray this morning. And so it reminds me, and I stop and I pray there. So that's how I've tried to build into my daily life, my daily routine, relative to how I bring faith to work.
Love it. Love it. Do you guys have you start meetings at all with prayer at times? In like meetings you might have with teams? I'm not exactly sure, which teams you have, but.
No. I would love to say yes. I don't. Aside from a lunch group that I've had off and on, where we've had 4 or 5 of us as believers that would meet for lunch and take an hour once a week to just pray for each other and just catch up. I mean, generally speaking, I guess we don't get to start my meetings with prayer.
Yeah, same for me. Okay. And sometimes that's just a silent prayer, right? Where you can pray yourself. If that structure's not allowed. I know sometimes there's a lot of intentionality where prayer can be the very first thing that happens in a board meeting or whatever, meeting that might be. But, I love the panel here because they're all in different situations, and they still have a way to make it work for them. And it starts with them as individuals. So that's good stuff. I can tell you my personal situation. I went from where we did have prayer before a lot of meetings, and now I'm in an organization where that's brand new and a little uncomfortable for them. So we're starting with prayer at meals, and hey, may I offer a blessing for the meal? Never been turned down yet. And I honestly don't know where a lot of these people stand, but they're very open to my faith and allowing me to practice it. So just a little side note on that. Well, we're running down on the time here, so I just want to give each of you kind of one last chance to say, hey, what's the takeaway? If there's one thing you want these people to hear and understand in a takeaway, what would that be? Or two?
Maybe a couple. I would say is like a recovered control freak and someone who's incredibly impatient by nature, that faith at work is not about perfection, and you do not need to preach to reflect Christ. And I think that's a takeaway from our speakers yesterday, us up here, is that it's in the obedience and the daily walk and decisions that you make that really have true impact moving forward.
Yeah, I think for me, you're right. It's not about perfection. It's easy to say be consistent, right? So people say that your life is always a witness, but that doesn't mean that it should be perfection or ever can be perfection, right? I think it involves taking some level of risk. When you're talking with people are telling you about their life issues. I was challenged at one point to, instead of say I'll be praying for that, to just say, can I pray for you, right? And take that moment. And I can tell you, as in my career, I think I can only think of one time somebody ever turned me down when I asked them if I could pray for them in that moment. And I think that still comes back to genuinely valuing people, right? I was reading in James a few weeks ago, and I was talking about the power of the tongue, right? You use the tongue to bless the Lord your God, and you use the tongue to curse somebody else. And the phrase after was, somebody created in the likeness of God. And so that person has value intrinsically because they are created in the likeness of God. God imparts value to them as a person, not because of anything they can do for you or anybody else, but because of who they are, because of who God created them to be. And if you value people, you can genuinely love them. And there's a lot of grace for mistakes if people feel like you genuinely care about them.
We might have to talk after this because I don't know how you get to recovered control freak. I'd love to be able to do that.
Sounds like a new topic we have covered, right?
I think, takeaway for me, and again, just coming from the HR perspective, I don't know what people hear, how that's been addressed in your organizations, but that it is okay. It is legal to bring your faith to work. It's okay to live your faith at work and be who you are. So I just encourage you to be okay with that, to know that it's okay to live that part of your life at work.
Thank you guys. Just great job. Thanks for being vulnerable. Thanks for just sharing your wisdom and your insights. We heard a lot about boldness today. I think about I'd rather get in trouble down here than get in trouble up there. And that's how I keep my boldness in check a little bit. You heard that from these guys today. You also heard, legal, no issues there. But you also heard just it starts with you. And you can just, wherever you are in whatever organization, and it's not just work. It can be a family, it can be your friend group, whatever. It starts with you, but you get to be who you want to be, who God created you to be. And so that freedom is certainly a blessing. And, in reality, not every country has that freedom like we do here. And as much as we think we get controlled by a lot of things, we do have a lot of freedom, and that includes religious freedom. So just a sincere thank you again for being up here and sharing. Let's give these guys a round of applause.
Thank you for joining us on Faith at Work. We hope today's episode has inspired and equipped you to live out your faith in the workforce. Don't forget to subscribe, share with a friend, and join us next time as we continue to equip you on your journey of faith at work. Faith at Work brought to you by the Unity Foundation. Learn more at unityfoundation-alexandria.com.